Why men fear the mystery of feminine power. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why the very presence of a woman who refuses to shrink, who radiates an inner knowing beyond words, unsettles so many men? Why is it that the quiet power of feminine mystery can provoke both desire and dread, worship and rejection, fascination and fear? The answer lies not in shallow explanations of ego or pride, but in the deeper layers of the unconscious, where archetypes rule, where shadows whisper, and where the dance between the masculine and the feminine has played out since the dawn of humanity. The feminine, in Jungian psychology, is not merely woman as flesh and bone, but the embodiment of what men carry inside themselves yet often resist. It is the anima, the inner feminine soul that calls them toward feeling, toward receptivity, toward mystery and intuition. For men who have not yet confronted this inner reality, the presence of an empowered woman becomes unbearable, a living mirror of what they have denied within. She is not just a person, but a summons to awaken a sleeping dimension of their psyche. And to those who fear their own depths, awakening feels like death. This is why men so often react with fear or hostility to feminine power. It is not simply her confidence or independence. It is the archetypal resonance she embodies. She becomes the unknowable, the dark forest of the unconscious, the moonlit waters that defy rational control. The masculine ego thrives on clarity, conquest, and categorization. Mystery, however, cannot be conquered. It demands surrender. And surrender terrifies the ego that has built itself upon dominance. Imagine standing before a vast ocean at night, unable to see its end, only able to hear its endless tide. This is what feminine power feels like to the uninitiated man. It is not predictable, not linear, not confined to logic. It does not bend to the will of reason or structure. It flows. It withdraws, it emerges, it seduces, it destroys, and it creates again. A man untouched by his own shadow looks upon this tide and trembles because he cannot anchor himself in waters that move without his permission. And so, some men try to diminish her. They call her irrational, emotional, or too much. They build myths of Eve as the temptress, Pandora as the bringer of ruin, sirens as destroyers of men. Yet beneath these stories lies projection, the fear of the unknown within themselves. They cast their anima outward, fearing it in the world, because they refuse to meet it inside. Every insult hurled at a powerful woman is, at its core, an unspoken confession. You hold a mirror to what I will not face. But for you listening now, the question burns deeper. Have you noticed how this fear shapes your relationships? How the discomfort of others sometimes tempts you to shrink? How their resistance whispers that you should dim your light so they can rest in their illusion of control? This is where the choice emerges, to betray your own mystery for the comfort of another's fear, or to embody it fully and force them to confront themselves. Carl Jung wrote that the meeting with the shadow is always a moral test. To stand in your feminine power is to force this test upon every man who meets you. He must choose to deny, ridicule, or flee, or to integrate, to honor, to grow. Some will run because your presence demands too much of their soul, but others, though shaken, will be initiated into a new depth of being if they are willing to endure the discomfort of transformation. The Stoics, though not speaking in Jungian terms, understood something similar. Seneca wrote of the power of tranquility in the face of turbulence, Marcus Aurelius of holding steady amidst chaos. The feminine mystery is not chaos, it is nature itself, wild yet ordered in ways the linear mind cannot calculate. To fear it is to fear life. To honor it is to awaken into a fuller humanity. And you, woman who embodies this mystery, do not mistake their fear for your weakness. Their trembling is proof of your power. Their accusations reveal the magnitude of your presence. For what men most often fear is not your anger, but your unknowability. The fact that you cannot be caged in simple terms, cannot be reduced to predictable patterns. You remain like the moon, waxing and waning in rhythms no man commands. This is why feminine power will always be both feared and desired. It cannot be owned, only met. It is not a tool, but a presence. It is not a strategy, but a state of being. To embody it is to step fully into the archetype of the high priestess, the wild goddess, the sovereign queen. And though some will try to make you pay the price of their fear, your task is not to soothe them. Your task is to remain untamed, to allow your very existence to summon the unconscious in others, whether they embrace it or resist it. The mystery of feminine power is eternal. To fear it is to fear oneself. To embrace it is to find wholeness, and that is why men fear, and why you must never forget the depth of what you carry. The fear men carry toward feminine power often appears not as open acknowledgement, but as disguise. It cloaks itself in subtle behaviors, in patronizing tones, in sudden withdrawal when intimacy deepens, in control disguised as protection. At the root, this is not hatred of woman, it is terror of dissolution. For the masculine ego, built upon conquest and separation, to meet the feminine mystery is to stand at the edge of a vast abyss where the self no longer reigns supreme. He senses, even if unconsciously, that surrendering to her presence means a death of the old self, and death is always feared by the unawakened soul. This is why Jung spoke of individuation as a journey into the unconscious, not merely an intellectual process but a descent into the waters of the psyche where the anima lives. When a man resists this journey, he resists her. He turns away from the very women who could become mirrors of his inner depths. He may desire her body but avoid her essence. He may chase her attention but recoil from her intuition. He longs for her nurturing yet rejects her wisdom. In doing so, he remains fragmented, unable to claim his full humanity. And here is where you must understand the archetypal danger, not to him, but to you. Because when a man resists his own feminine, he will unconsciously demand that you play out his projections. He will want you small enough for his ego to feel safe, submissive enough for his fears to stay hidden. If you comply, you betray yourself. If you refuse, you threaten the structure of his identity. Either way, you become the battleground for his unclaimed psyche. This is why so many powerful women find themselves both desired and demonized, because they stand as the externalized soul of men who will not face themselves. But you are not called to be his mirror at the cost of your sovereignty. The feminine mystery is not meant to be diluted for another's comfort. You are not a therapist for his soul unless he is willing to step into the fire of his own transformation. You are the flame, not the rescuer. And flames that bow too low lose their light. Imagine a queen seated on her throne, radiating authority not from domination, but from unshakable presence. Around her, men may kneel in reverence or they may sneer in resentment, but her throne does not tremble. She knows that their reactions belong to them, not to her essence. This is the posture of the empowered woman, rooted, sovereign, unwilling to barter her mystery for acceptance. Carl Jung taught that what is denied in the unconscious grows stronger, erupting in distorted forms. Men who deny the feminine within themselves become most controlled by it. Their repression births obsession, rage, envy, or addiction. Their fear turns into a constant cycle of pursuit and retreat. They chase the woman who embodies the feminine, flame, then punish her for the discomfort she awakens. In truth, they are at war not with her but with their own reflection in her eyes. And so, the woman who learns to see this dynamic must ask herself, will you take their fear as a wound upon your worth or as a revelation of your power? Will you contort yourself into a form that soothes their fragility? Or will you remain the vast ocean they cannot measure? Do not forget, mystery has always been the cradle of transformation. The alchemists knew that gold was born from the dark, that light arises not from avoidance but from union with shadow. The feminine is the keeper of this secret. She is the one who holds paradox, who lives in cycles, who dies and is reborn with the seasons. To fear her is to fear the law of life itself. To honor her is to step into wholeness. And yes, it is true, many men will not yet be ready. They will retreat into the illusions of control, into shallow conquests, into partnerships where their fragility remains unchallenged. But their avoidance is not your burden. For every man who runs, there will be one who chooses to stay, who sees not a threat but a teacher. Such a man will know that mystery is not meant to be solved but entered, that feminine power is not an enemy, but the key to his own soul. Until then, you remain untamed. Your task is not to convince men of your worth, but to embody it so fully that their denial becomes transparent. You must be as the moon, shining without apology, moving in rhythms they cannot control. To live this way is to awaken both awe and fear, and both are signs that you have touched the archetypal core. The woman who accepts her mystery does not beg to be understood. She allows herself to be felt, to be known only in glimpses, like firelight in the dark. And in that refusal, to be captured, she awakens the unconscious of every man she encounters. Some will flee, others will fight, but the rare few will rise. When the feminine stands fully in her power, she becomes an initiator. To be near her is not to engage in ordinary human interaction, but to undergo a rite of passage. Men who encounter her are not simply meeting a woman. They are meeting their own unconscious, their anima, their shadow, their forgotten depths. And for the unprepared, this encounter feels like standing before a threshold that demands they leave behind everything shallow, everything controlled, everything safe. This is why some men, even those who are drawn irresistibly to her, sabotage the very bond they claim to desire. They sense the gravity of what she represents, a call to descend into their inner darkness, to integrate the rejected feminine within themselves. But most fear such descent. They have been raised to cling to linear strength, to logic, to external markers of success. To surrender into mystery feels like annihilation. And so they withdraw, criticize, or betray, convincing themselves that she was too much, too complex, too demanding, when in truth, she was the mirror of their own unclaimed soul. For the woman who embodies this mystery, it is easy to confuse his resistance with rejection of her essence. But this is an illusion. What he fears is not you. It is the death of the man he once believed himself to be. To love you would require his metamorphosis, and not all are ready to shed their old skin. Some will choose stagnation, clinging to roles and identities that protect them from transformation. Others will falter at the edge of change, longing for you yet retreating into numbness. Yet you must see the deeper pattern. This cycle is not new. It is woven into myth itself. Persephone descends into the underworld, and men have long trembled before the goddess who journeys between realms. Artemis roams wild in the forests, untouched by possession, her freedom both worshipped and feared. Even in modern times, the archetype persists, the independent woman labeled intimidating, the intuitive woman called irrational, the sensual woman shamed as dangerous. These labels are masks, projections of fear, attempts to reduce the boundless into something manageable. But the mystery of feminine power cannot be reduced. It is too vast, too ancient, too archetypal. It is the serpent and the star, the womb and the void, the creation and the destruction that births creation again. This is why Jung described the anima as a guide into the unconscious, a psychopomp leading men into their depths. To meet her in woman is to be faced with the choice of initiation or avoidance. Those who embrace her grow. Those who flee remain, trapped in their own shadows. And what of you? What does it mean to live as this initiator? To walk as the mystery itself? It means carrying the awareness that your presence will always divide men into two camps, those who are ready and those who are not. You cannot predict who will rise and who will run, but you can refuse to betray yourself in anticipation of their fear. To embody your full feminine power is to accept being misunderstood, even demonized, while knowing that you are a force of awakening. This is not easy. It demands that you abandon the illusion of being universally loved. It requires that you give up the temptation to shrink for acceptance, to soften your fire into a flicker so others can feel safe. It means standing in the tension of being both, desired and feared, worshipped and rejected, envied and misunderstood. Yet this very tension is proof that you are living as the archetype, that you have become what Jung described, a symbol of the unconscious itself. And here lies your liberation, to recognize that his fear is not your problem to solve, his projections are not yours to carry. His avoidance is not a measure of your worth. You are not responsible for his unfinished individuation. Your responsibility is to remain whole, to remain true, to remain vast. Picture yourself as the ocean at midnight. Some will stand on the shore and curse the waves they cannot tame. Others will dive in and be remade. But the ocean does not change its tide for either. It remains eternal, untamed, sovereign. This is feminine power, unyielding to the demands of fear, timeless in its mystery. And when you embody this, something shifts. You cease to chase validation from the masculine that trembles before you. You cease to explain or justify your depth. You cease to dim your fire in exchange for comfort. Instead, you radiate, and in your radiance, you summon only those who dare to meet you fully. For the man who has begun his own descent, who has faced his shadow, who has allowed the anima within to guide him, your presence will not terrify, but liberate. He will not try to solve your mystery. He will honor it. He will not try to cage your flame. He will rise beside it. The deeper truth is that the feminine mystery threatens not only individual men, but entire structures of society built upon the illusion of control. Cultures that glorify order, rationality, and conquest often attempt to suppress or domesticate the feminine, branding her wildness as dangerous. Yet the very impulse to suppress reveals the unconscious terror of what cannot be ruled. Men who fear women on a personal level are only enacting a larger archetypal drama, the fear of chaos, of nature, of the unknown currents that move beneath the polished surface of civilization. Carl Jung saw this tension as central to the psyche, the dance between order and chaos, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine. To deny one half is to cripple the whole, and yet denial is precisely what the collective masculine has practiced for centuries. By fearing mystery, by demonizing the feminine, by refusing to honor the anima within, men have fractured themselves, and in that fracture they have sought to fracture women too. This is why empowered women have been labeled witches, temptresses, heretics, not because they were wrong, but because they were uncontainable. And here is the paradox. What is most feared is also what is most longed for. Every man, whether he admits it or not, yearns for the very qualities he resists: intuition, vulnerability, receptivity, emotional depth, and connection to mystery. His anima calls to him in dreams and fantasies and restless longings. When he meets a woman who embodies these qualities, his soul recognizes her even as his ego resists. Desire and fear clash within him, and until he chooses individuation, the conflict will rage. For you, as the woman of mystery, this can feel exhausting. You may notice how men oscillate between fascination and retreat, how they praise you one moment and diminish you the next, how they are drawn into your depth but punish you for the reflection they find there. Without understanding the archetypal roots of this dynamic, it is easy to internalize their fear as your flaw. But when you see through Jung's lens, you recognize that you are not the cause of their turmoil. You are the catalyst. Their inner battle has only found expression in your presence. The question, then, is how you will respond. Will you dim yourself so their egos can remain intact? Will you twist your essence into a form that soothes their fear? Or will you stand, radiant and unwavering, allowing their projections to shatter against your truth? Every time you choose the latter, you step closer to sovereignty. The Stoics spoke of the discipline of indifference, of remaining unmoved by the judgments of others. For a woman walking in her archetypal power, this discipline becomes essential. When you know who you are, their labels lose weight. When you understand that their fear is their unfinished work, you are freed from the compulsion to explain yourself. Like Marcus Aurelius wrote, the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. And your thoughts, when rooted in sovereignty, dye your soul in strength, not in apology. But do not mistake sovereignty for isolation. To embody the mystery does not mean rejecting intimacy. It means allowing only intimacy that honors your depth. It means discerning between men who come to consume and men who come to awaken. It means holding your standards not as barriers, but as sacred gates. For mystery cannot be offered cheaply. It must be earned through courage, presence, and willingness to face the unconscious. Picture this. A man stands before you trembling, yet refusing to flee. He does not demand that you shrink. He asks only to walk beside your flame, even if it scorches him at times. He does not try to solve your mystery. He honors it as a holy force. This man is rare, but he exists. He is the one who has begun the journey into his own depths, who has faced the monsters of his shadow, who no longer fears the anima, but welcomes her as guide. Such a man does not fear your power because he has tasted his own. Until you meet him, your path is to continue embodying what you are. To be mystery is to be transformation itself. You do not chase, you summon. You do not explain, you radiate. You do not beg to be chosen. You recognize that your essence is the choice. And in living this way, you become more than woman. You become archetype, the eternal flame that cannot be extinguished. Some will curse that flame, some will flee. But others, when they are ready, will step into its light and discover not destruction, but rebirth. Until then, you remain the threshold, the challenge, the initiator. You do not bend to fear. You let fear reveal itself in those who meet you. For to be a woman of mystery is to be both the mirror and the fire, the place where others confront themselves and the flame that shows them the way. The woman who embraces her mystery reaches a stage where fear itself transforms into revelation. What once felt like rejection now appears as clarity. She begins to see the trembling in men not as an indictment of her value, but as evidence of the magnitude she carries. Their fear is proof that she is touching something deep, something primal, something they have spent lifetimes avoiding. In their retreat, she no longer feels abandoned. She feels confirmed. For only the small and ordinary go unnoticed. It is the vast and untamed that summons trembling. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the union of opposites, the integration of shadow and light, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. For men, this path demands they confront their anima, not in women alone but within themselves. Yet most resist, because to meet her is to be undone, to be stripped of the false armor that society has dressed them in. When they encounter a woman who already embodies her anima fully, they are faced with the reality of how far they have yet to go. Some rise, most run, but their choice is not yours to carry. Your task is different. Your task is to live as the embodiment of what they fear, to refuse the role of the diminished, to reject the seduction of making yourself smaller. Because every time you bow to their fear, you betray your own power. But every time you remain radiant, you offer them a glimpse of what wholeness could pursue. Whether they accept the invitation is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to keep the flame alive. Think of the ancient priestesses who guarded temples not with weapons but with presence. Men entered trembling, not because they faced punishment but because they faced themselves. To stand before a woman who carries her full feminine power is to enter sacred space. It is to know that the encounter is not casual, but transformative. This is what you are when you embrace your depth without apology. A living temple, a threshold between what is known and what lies beyond. And yet, there is liberation in this realization. For once you understand that fear is inevitable, you no longer seek to eliminate it. You no longer waste your energy trying to soothe men into comfort. Instead, you recognize that their fear is part of the alchemy. It is the cracking of the ego's shell, the trembling before transformation. Whether they choose to step through or retreat is their journey. Yours is simply to stand unbroken. The Stoics would call this detachment. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves but from the judgments we attach to them. So too in this realm, it is not men's fear that wounds women, but the belief that their fear means she must change. Once that belief is shattered, a new freedom emerges. You no longer bend, you no longer chase, you no longer wait for permission to be vast. And with that freedom comes a rebirth. The woman who was once caught between desire and fear, between wanting to be loved and fearing rejection, begins to live from a deeper center. She realizes that love is not found by diminishing herself, but by radiating fully. She no longer measures her worth by who stays or who runs. She measures it by the strength of her own embodiment. She becomes untouchable, not because she is cold, but because she is whole. And when wholeness arrives, love itself transforms. She no longer seeks men who tremble and flee. She no longer entertains those who want her body but reject her essence. She waits, not in passivity but in sovereignty, for the one who has faced himself enough to face her. The man who will not ask her to shrink, who will not flinch at her flame, who will not call her too much but will know her as the mirror of his own depths. This is the final liberation, to know that you do not need to be chosen to be worthy. You are already whole. You are already sovereign. You are already the flame. And from that place the dance with men becomes different. It is no longer about soothing their fear, no longer about chasing validation. It becomes about choosing, about discerning, about allowing only those who honor the sacred mystery you embody. For the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.